Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. They handcuffed an American colonel, but a call froze the police on the scene. The sun was beating down hard this Tuesday afternoon on the small town of Springfield, nestled peacefully in the heart of the American Midwest. It was one of those summer days when the sky seems too big, a pure blue without a single cloud, and the air is thick, laden with heat and the scent of cut grass. The streets, wide and quiet, were lined with century-old trees whose bushy branches drew moving shadows on the sidewalks. The windows of local businesses reflected the rays of the sun, making the artisanal signs of bakeries, tea rooms, and bookstores sparkle. A light but warm breeze made the plane tree leaves dance lazily, and each gust carried with it echoes of children's laughter, music pouring from an old radio, and relaxed conversations on the terraces. An elderly gentleman read the newspaper on a bench, a cup of iced coffee in hand, while a lazy dog slept in the shade of a street lamp. Everything exuded tranquility, the routine of a city where nothing ever really seemed to disturb the order of things. Suddenly, gently breaking this torpor, elegant black car, a Lincoln MKZ with lightly tinted windows, pulled slowly up along the curb, right in front of the local bookstore, Books and Beyond, a warm and discreet place, run by a retired couple with a passion for literature. The shine of the bodywork contrasted with the dust accumulated on the neighboring pickup trucks and utility vehicles. The engine cut out. Silence returned. The door opened, and a woman stepped out. She moved with grace and poise. Look, Colonel Grace Williams, a 38-year-old U.S. Army officer, stepped from the car with the effortless poise of a woman accustomed to making decisions under pressure. Her reputation preceded her in military circles. Decorated multiple times for courage, she had led humanitarian missions in conflict zones, brokered peace in unstable regions, and trained hundreds of young recruits. But here in Springfield, she was just a girl coming home. She had taken a few days off to visit his mother, suffering from a chronic illness and living alone in a small wooden house south of the city. This leave was not just a logistical break, it was a deeply human, intimate moment, where the girl became a girl again before becoming a soldier again. Grace wore a modest but neat civilian attire, well-cut khaki pants, a navy polo shirt with a stiff collar, and a light jacket tied around his waist. On his feet, comfortable walking shoes, worn by the miles but still impeccable. On his left wrist, a military watch, accurate, sturdy, a gift from his late father, also a former officer. His black hair was pulled into a low bun, simple and strict. A few rebellious strands tried to escape in the wind. His face, sculpted by time and experience, bore the traces of fatigue accumulated over the years, but also the quiet strength of a woman who went through hell without ever lowering her eyes. Her eyes, dark and lively, scanned the surroundings carefully, not out of paranoia, but out of habit. Everything about her exuded self-control. And yet, despite her imposing stature, despite the energy contained in each of her gestures, Grace moved gently. She didn't walk like a conqueror, but like a woman at peace, walking on the land of her childhood. She breathed deeply, pausing for a moment to contemplate the front of the bookstore. A faint smile crossed her lips. She still remembered the summers she'd spent leafing through novels in that store as a teenager, before the army became her calling. This return to Springfield had the bittersweet taste of nostalgia, of those places that never truly change, even when we have. She took a step towards the glass door of the bookstore, unaware that a few dozen meters away, someone was already looking at her suspiciously. A few meters away, in a patrol car parked in the shade of a maple tree, Agent Rick Dawson, 27, watched the comings and goings on Main Avenue. A native of Springfield, he knew the streets like the back of his hand. The son of a former local sheriff and the grandson of a Vietnam War veteran, Rick had grown up with a strong sense of authority and duty. But that sense of duty, combined with a limited education and an upbringing filled with latent prejudices, had forged in him a rigid worldview. There were those who belonged, and those who didn't. Rick Dawson wasn't inherently bad. He meant well. But he suffered from a complex that is very common in some law enforcement agencies, that of wanting proof that he is in control of the situation, whatever the cost, even when he doesn't really understand it. He wanted to prove himself, to be taken seriously by his more experienced colleagues, to show that he knew how to sniff out abnormal situations. That day, he was particularly tense. A radio alert had mentioned a luxury black car reported a few miles away, supposedly stolen in another county. He'd received few details, but it was enough to fuel his suspicions. In his mind, things lined up: high-end car, military plates, black driver, and alone in a quiet neighborhood. That was all Rick needed to convince himself he was onto something. When he saw the black Lincoln MKZ sedan pull up in front of the bookstore, his instinct, or rather his unquestioned biases, became active. He frowned, sat up straighter in his seat, and peered through the tinted windshield. A black woman driving such an expensive vehicle, in a quiet corner of Springfield, with a military license plate, think TL, what if this is exactly the perfect camouflage? Doubt turned into certainty in his mind. He turned off the engine, got out of his vehicle, and nervously closed the door. His boots slapped on the pavement as he walked briskly toward Grace's car. His hand absent-mindedly brushed against his belt, checking the position of his weapon, a habit he always adopted when he felt he was about to intervene. He hadn't exchanged a word with her yet, but in her gaze, mistrust was already there. He approached, chest out, trying to give himself an authority he wasn't sure he possessed inside. "Hello, madam, are you aware that this vehicle has been reported as potentially stolen?" he asked, without a smile, without preamble, in a dry and suspicious tone. The woman turned slowly toward him. There was nothing threatening about her. On the contrary, her calm demeanor, her upright posture, her clear gaze, betrayed perfect self-control. She didn't lose her temper, didn't protest. "I am the Colonel Grace Williams, from the 101st Airborne Battalion," she replied with icy calm. "This vehicle belongs to me, here are my papers." She held out her open wallet, where a military card with her photo and rank could be seen. But Dawson didn't see a high-ranking officer. He saw what his malformed reflexes told him to see, someone he needed to control. His irritation rose. He wasn't used to being challenged, let alone with such poise. Grace's calm, authoritative tone unsettled him. It didn't fit with his internal script, the one where he was the guardian of the law, facing a confused suspect. He narrowed his eyes, then took a step back, leaving Sun talkie-walkie. "Central, this is Unit 12, I need backup to check a potentially stolen vehicle, military license plate, driver allegedly military," he repeats insistently, as if to make the radio itself doubt. Then he addressed Grace, raising his hand authoritatively. "I need to check your documents in more detail. Don't move. I gave them to you." "My identity is perfectly verifiable," she said, a little harsher this time. But Rick wasn't listening to him anymore. He was in his own film, in which he had to control the situation before things got out of hand. Without warning, he took a step back and raised his voice. "I order you to stay where you are. Put your hands on the vehicle now." Grace, surprised by the abruptness, raised her chin slightly. Her voice remained calm, but a shadow of shock crossed her gaze. It wasn't the first time she'd been looked at askance in civilian clothes, but never had an interaction escalated so quickly. "Mr. Officer," she said calmly, but with unquestionable firmness, "I am a soldier, a colonel in the United States Army. I ask that you respect protocol. I have my papers on me, in my inside pocket." She articulated each word precisely, as if on a battlefield, aware that every sentence could be misinterpreted. But Agent Dawson, tense, unable to read the situation correctly, could only hear the beating of his own heart. It was no longer a question of justice or prudence. For him, control had become a matter of ego. And Grace's calmness? He took it as provocation. "Put your hands on the vehicle now," he shouted, his voice rising a notch, sharp as a blade. Her tone echoed through the street, breaking the surrounding murmur. A few passers-by, previously distracted by their shopping or their coffees, turned their heads. The scene immediately intrigued them. A well-dressed, calm black woman facing an agitated young police officer. There was something smack of injustice here. Some discreetly took out their phones. The first videos began to be filmed. Others approached a little, hesitant, whispering among themselves. The atmosphere, until then peaceful, became heavy, charged with electrical discomfort. Grace, feeling the tension rising, held her position. She hadn't moved an inch, her hands slightly spread apart as a sign of non-aggression. Yet, as she slowly slid her hand inside her jacket to remove her identification, Rick Dawson leaps forward. "No sudden movements," he yelled, grabbing her arm roughly. The crowd jumped. Before she could even explain, he grabbed her with both hands, turned her and pressed her against the hot hood of the car. The shock was brutal but controlled, as if it wanted to humiliate her without leaving too visible a mark. Grace winced slightly, feeling the heat of the metal seep through her clothes. But she didn't scream. She didn't beg, she remained straight, even bent under duress. "You are making a mistake," she whispered, her voice still calm, as he put the handcuffs on her wrists. But Dawson couldn't hear anything anymore. Blinded by adrenaline, he glanced around, only now realizing the dozens of eyes staring at him, the phones recording everything. He had just handcuffed a black woman without violence, without resistance, and now without legitimate reason. Grace fell to her knees on the asphalt, her face almost touching the ground. The heat of the asphalt burned her knees through her pants, but she remained unperturbed. She raised her head, briefly meeting the gaze of two children behind a window. They stared at her, mouths agape, as if the world had just cracked before their eyes. She took a breath, closed her eyes for a moment, then opened her mouth. "Take my phone. It's in my right pocket. Call the number at the top of my favorite contacts. Now." Dawson hesitated, raising an eyebrow skeptically. He slipped his hand into the indicated pocket and pulled out the device. The screen lit up with a photo of two smiling soldiers in uniform. He chuckled under his breath. "And I guess I'm going to run into the president," he said sarcastically, half mockingly, unaware that the ground he was walking on would soon collapse beneath him. He dialed, put it on speakerphone. The dial tone rang. "Yes," answered a deep, direct voice on the other end of the line. "Yes, this is Officer Rick Dawson of the Springfield Police Department. I just stopped a woman claiming to be an Army colonel." He didn't have time to finish. "Who did you handcuff?" Cut off the voice, icy, authoritarian. A deathly silence fell. Everyone listening around instantly understood that something serious had just happened. "Agent Dawson, this is General Robert Harlan, commander of the Eastern Military District. You have just handcuffed a decorated veteran, Colonel Grace Williams. If you do not release her immediately, consider your career over and your service suspended. You have 5 seconds before the Pentagon takes action." Rick Dawson froze. His whole body seemed to tense up. His gaze shifted from one passerby to another, then to the camera of a teenager filming right next to him. He turned pale. His trembling fingers slid over the clasp of the handcuffs. "Colonel. I'm sorry," he stammered, carefully removing the handcuffs, almost shamefully. Grace slowly straightened, rubbed her reddened wrists, then turned to him, her face hard but dignified. "You didn't just arrest a woman. You humiliated the uniform. Yours. And mine." Dawson remained silent. The whole street fell silent. The video, broadcast live by several witnesses, was to go viral across the country within hours. The crowd, now shocked and silent, watched Grace slowly rise, her wrists still marked by the metal bites of the handcuffs. The physical pain was real, but insignificant compared to the affront she had just suffered. Her face, however, betrayed no hatred, no distress. His gaze was straight, proud, incandescent with intact dignity. A murmur crossed the street. There were a few, "Oh my God," gasps, barely audible protests. Several witnesses had stopped filming, not out of disinterest, but out of respect, out of instinct, as if something solemn were playing out before them. Grace spoke to Dawson, not as an enemy, but as a man she wanted to awaken from his blindness. "You didn't just arrest a black woman today," she said in a calm, clear and measured voice. "You have humiliated the very symbol of the American military. You handcuffed one of its senior officers for no reason, because your eye was guided by your fears, not by the facts." Each word fell like a slap. Dawson didn't respond. His gaze shifted, his hands trembled slightly. He knew he couldn't erase this moment. He was now the agent who handcuffed Colonel Grace Williams, and the whole country was going to know about it. Meanwhile, the videos already shot were being shared on social media at breakneck speed. In less than an hour, the name of Grace Williams was featured a national trend in Twitter, Instagram, and even TikTok. Clips of the scene were circulating everywhere: Grace's calm, the arrogance of the arrest, the surreal phone call with General Harlan. Hashtags multiplied, hashtag Colonel Williams, hashtag respect her rank, hashtag justice for Grace. Veterans, soldiers, civilians, mothers, children, celebrities, all spoke. Political figures demanded accountability. Analysts denounced the systemic racism, the racial profiling, disrespect for institutions, ignorance of military procedures. A few days later, in the Springfield Central Police Station office, the atmosphere was icy. Officer Rick Dawson, now suspended from patrol duty, sat across from an internal affairs inspector, listening to the charges in hushed tones. His superiors, pressured by the military hierarchy, had acted quickly. He was forced to follow in-depth training on unconscious bias, conflict de-escalation, and constitutional obligations to members of the armed forces. But this was not enough to wash away the public humiliation or restore confidence. The police uniform he had worn with such pride a few days earlier now seemed heavy, almost foreign. Grace, meanwhile, returned to her base. But something had changed. When she entered the main courtyard of Fort Campbell's command center, her colleagues were waiting for her. Silently. All lined up. From the young recruits to the highest-ranking officers, they greeted her as one would greet a legend. A respectful silence preceded a round of restrained but vibrant applause. A military journalist later asked her if she felt avenged. She replied, "I'm not seeking revenge. I want my brothers, my sisters, my children to be looked at and seen for who they are, not for what some fear they might be. I want my uniform to protect, even when I'm not wearing it." She resumed her service with the same discipline, but now, his aura had changed. She no longer wore only her medals on her chest, decorations won on distant lands. She carried a story. A fight. A civil victory. She had become in spite of herself a symbol, that of unalterable dignity, of mastery in the face of injustice, of elegance in resistance. Letters came to him from all over the country. A black teenage girl from Texas wrote to him, "Thanks to you, I want to become an officer." A Hispanic war veteran, "Thank you for standing up for all of us." A former high school teacher, "You reminded the country that respect is not based on skin color, but on heart, service, and merit." His story inspired a national campaign to strengthen law enforcement education on protocols related to veterans and minorities. Military bases were invited to collaborate with police departments. Dialogues were opened, bridges built between institutions too long separated by mistrust. And at every conference she was invited to, at every television interview, at every room she entered, people stood up. Not just for the colonel, but for what it represented. Honor, even when humiliated, can rise higher than ever.